There are ages in human history that left behind no stone monuments, no records chiseled in rock, no stories carved into clay tablets. There were no scribes to watch, no priests to remember, no historians to write what happened. And yet humanity was already here, breathing, walking, dreaming, evolving. What unfolded in that forgotten time remains one of the greatest mysteries ever to touch our species. We can study the ruins of ancient cities. We can decode lost languages. We can uncover forgotten civilizations. But this era, this silent world that existed before history, lived and died without a witness. It is as if an entire chapter of our existence was deliberately erased. But it wasn't erased. It was never written. We call this a gap, a break in time. A space before memory began. Imagine the world tens of thousands of years ago. There were no kingdoms, no calendars, no temples watching over the land. The earth belonged to nature alone. Ice stretched across continents. Forests grew wild and endless. Rivers carved paths through untouched soil. The world was vast and quiet, and every sound was swallowed by the wind. In that quiet, early humans began to take their first steps into existence. They didn't leave behind books. They didn't leave behind maps. They didn't leave behind the details we depend on today. All they left were footprints in the dirt and fragments of bone beneath the earth. But those silent traces whisper one thing to us. Humanity existed long before we understood ourselves. We tend to imagine the ancient world beginning with civilization, with cities and kings and pyramids. But those things are recent inventions compared to the time before. Tens of thousands of years passed in darkness, and yet life was unfolding silently across the world. Humans were learning, wandering, adapting, and changing in ways that still shape us today. This is the first twist in our story. Civilization is not where history begins. Civilization is the final result of something far older. Most of human time was spent without writing, without structures, without the buildings and artifacts we look for in the archaeological record. And so we label this time as prehistoric, as if it were empty or simple. But it was. Human beings were already thinking, solving, and dreaming. They built tools from bone and stone. They survived harsh winters and endless migrations. They stared at the rising moon and wondered about the stars. They didn't record history because they didn't know it was beginning. What makes this age even more mysterious is that the world itself was different. The continents were shaped by ice and water. Animals unlike anything alive today walked the earth. The climate shifted in violent cycles, forcing humans into a constant struggle for survival. They crossed deserts without knowing where they led. They crossed mountains without knowing what lay beyond. They crossed oceans in small, fragile boats. And yet somehow they kept going. There were no roads, and yet they traveled farther than any species before them. There were no compasses, and yet they found their way. There were no written stories, and yet knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. A parent would teach a child. A hunter would share wisdom with another. Survival became the first human story. This era before memory is not empty, it is full of lessons, victories, losses, and triumphs we will never fully understand. We often ask, where did we come from? How did we begin? What moment changed us into the humans we are today? But the truth is more confusing than we expect. There was no sudden beginning, no single invention or discovery. Human history didn't start with writing. It didn't start with cities. It started in silence. It started when early humans looked out into the darkness and saw possibility. The more scientists study this lost age, the stranger it becomes. We find tools more advanced than we expected. We find remains older than we believe humans should be. We find traces of migrations that occurred long before our timelines allow. Every discovery pushes the beginning of our story further and further back. The world before memory was not simple. It was vast, complex, and deeply human. Imagine a night thousands of miles from any settlement. A small fire burns in the cold. A tribe sits close together beneath the stars. They watch the flames dance against the dark. Somewhere in the distance, a river roars through the wilderness. Their world is full of danger, but it is also full of wonder. No one writes this moment down. No one marks the date. But this is where our story begins. The second twist is this: history does not need writing to exist. Some histories live in silence. Most of what shaped us happened before the first words were carved into stone. The lessons that made us human were learned in a world that left no record. That silence holds more truth than any book. It speaks of adaptation, of survival, of the first spark of imagination. The first myths, the first dreams, the first questions about who we are. We think of ancient ruins as mysterious, but the true mystery lies much deeper than that. It lies in the years we can never fully recover. We know so much about the past, and yet we know almost nothing about where it truly began. The most important transformation in our story happened before memory, before civilization, before history even had a name. And so, this chapter closes with a thought. Our origins are older than everything we can see, older than writing, older than monuments, older than the world we call history. Before memory, there was humanity, silent, wandering, watching the world change. The first chapter of our story wasn't written, it was lived. There was a moment in human history when our ancestors began to move, not by choice, not by curiosity, but by an instinct far older than civilization itself. Long before empires rose, long before the first cities were carved into stone, early humans stood on the edge of the world they knew, and they stepped forward into the unknown. No maps showed the way. No stories told what waited in the distance. Yet they traveled. This is the first mystery of human migration. They moved across continents without tools for navigation, yet somehow they found the right direction. Across deserts, across mountains, across frozen coastlines. They walked distances that modern explorers would struggle to survive. And they did it with nothing more than instinct, the climate, and the stars. Imagine a world untouched by borders. There are no roads or paths, no lights of distant towns, only wilderness stretching endlessly in all directions. The only guide was the sky. The only map was memory. Every new step meant facing a world they had never seen before, and yet they continued. For thousands of years, small groups pushed into strange lands. They left behind familiar hunting grounds and traveled toward new horizons. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know what waited for them beyond the next ridge or river, but something ancient drove them onward. Here lies the first twist of this chapter. Humanity did not spread because of opportunity. Humanity spread because survival demanded it. Ice ages came and went. Forests turned into deserts. Rivers flooded and vanished. Without knowing it, our ancestors followed the patterns of the earth itself. They moved with the seasons. They chased migrating animals. They followed melting glaciers and changing winds. In their footsteps, the world began to change. A camp of wanderers might stay in one place for months. Then one night the stars shifted, the air grew colder, the prey disappeared, fires were put out, bags were carried. The people moved on again, following a path only nature understood. At the time, it wasn't a journey. It was life. These early migrations shaped everything that would come after. New languages emerged. New tools were forged. New cultures formed in places no human had ever walked before. The world that once felt vast and empty slowly filled with people. And as humanity spread, the world began to shrink. But this movement didn't happen suddenly. It was slow, like a planet turning through space. 1,000 steps one season, a few miles the next year. Generations passed, and families grew up far from the lands of their ancestors. No one knew how far they had traveled. No one knew they were changing the destiny of our species. This is the second twist. We did not conquer the world. We learned to belong to it. Our ancestors crossed frozen coastlines into new continents. They sailed unknown oceans in boats crafted from wood, reeds, and animal hide. They climbed mountains without knowing what lay beyond. They built shelters where no human had ever lived before. With every step, they adapted. With every migration, they evolved. With every unknown path, the story of humanity grew deeper. Picture a small group moving through a cold valley. The moon hangs low above distant peaks. Firelight flickers against the stone. In the quiet, someone stops and looks back at the fading path behind them. Then they keep walking forward into lands that no one has ever seen. That moment, repeated thousands of times, reshaped the world. Their movements were not random, and this becomes the third twist. Science now tells us that early humans may have followed ancient migration routes encoded in their minds by evolution. Patterns inherited through instinct, knowledge older than memory. Even without maps, they knew where the world was leading them. And wherever they went, the world responded. The climate changed. New animals appeared. Food sources shifted. Our ancestors didn't just survive these changes, they adapted to them. Bones grew stronger. Skin tones changed. Skills evolved. New ideas emerged from necessity and observation. The world was the teacher. Humanity was the student. Migration didn't simply allow humans to travel. It allowed humans to become different from one another. Groups separated by oceans and deserts developed unique cultures, tools, and traditions. The story of our differences begins here, in the footsteps of people who walked without knowing where they were going. And yet somehow they always found their way. As the chapter closes, imagine one last scene, a group of early humans standing at the edge of a vast ocean. The sun rises over the horizon, and the water glows gold beneath the sky. There is no fear, only a quiet understanding that the world is larger than anyone can see. They do not know that their journey will echo across tens of thousands of years. They do not know that their footsteps will create maps and migrations that shape the world we live in today. But they walk forward anyway, because the story of humanity is the story of movement, the story of exploration, the story of stepping into the unknown. The first wanderers didn't wait for history to begin. They carried it with them across every mile of Earth. And in doing so, they left us a legacy older than memory. We are a species born to move, born to explore, born to seek new horizons in a world without borders. There was a moment in human history when something changed, something deep within the mind. We cannot point to a single fossil or artifact and say, here, this is where it began. There was no sudden spark, no great invention that suddenly awakened intelligence. Yet the transformation happened, quietly, invisibly. This silent evolution may be the most mysterious chapter in our existence. Long before the first words were spoken, long before symbols were painted onto walls of rock, the human brain was preparing for the world to come. Neurons multiplied. Memory expanded. Imagination became a force of nature. No stone tablets record this awakening. No ancient scrolls describe the moment thought became life. But something in the human mind began to grow in a way that no other species ever experienced. The world was changing, and humanity changed with it. Picture an ancient night. A small group of early humans sit beside a fire, their faces glowing in flickering orange light. The flames whisper against the darkness. Sparks rise into the air like tiny stars. Above them, the constellations stretch across the sky, silent, eternal. In that moment, something happens that no one sees. A memory forms. A story begins. The mind becomes more than instinct. This is the first twist in our tale. Intelligence was born not in explosions of invention, but in silence, in observation of the world itself. For thousands of years, humans lived in a world that required more than strength. Hunting demanded planning. Surviving winter demanded knowledge. Watching the movement of stars required patience. Slowly, thought began to take shape. The first human minds learned to recognize patterns. They learned the cycles of the moon, the migration of animals, the shape of the seasons, and the hidden signals in nature. They remembered where water lay beneath the earth, where danger lingered, where shelter could be found. This wasn't just survival. It was the beginning of imagination. The brain grew in complexity. Thought began to take hold of reality. At first, human minds recognized only what they could see. But with time, they began to interpret the unseen. They dreamed, they planned, they feared, they hoped. No other species shaped the world with the power of thought. What changed within the mind, we do not fully know. Even science struggles to answer. But the evidence is there, buried in ancient skulls and the fragments of tools left behind. Somewhere in this lost age, the human brain nearly doubled in size. Neural pathways formed intricate connections. Reason replaced instinct. Curiosity replaced survival alone. The mind learned to travel through time, remembering the past, imagining the future. This was the second twist. The world forced the brain to grow. Harsh climates demanded innovation. Danger demanded strategy. The unknown demanded imagination. The brain evolved because it had to, not because it chose to. And slowly, generation after generation, the human mind became aware of itself. It is difficult to imagine a world without language, yet that world once existed. Communication was simple, gestures, glances, signs, but even these primitive signals carried meaning. They spoke of fear, hunger, shelter, and family. Slowly, sound found shape. Meaning found form. The first words began to take shape in the silence. Imagine hearing the first spoken word. A soft sound carried across the night. Maybe it named fire or water or the moon. Maybe it called attention to danger or hope. Whatever the reason, the moment that a sound represented an idea, the world changed. Language was born, not all at once, not suddenly, but slowly. A mother comforted her child with a sound. A hunter warned others with a call. A group shared knowledge with a single breath. And from those early words came stories, shared memories that would one day become myth. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, a whisper in the darkness. A word forming for the first time. A message sent from one mind to another. With language came a new world. Humans could now learn from one another. The lessons of survival no longer vanished with death. They could be passed on, repeated, improved. Wisdom grew stronger. Knowledge traveled across generations like a flame carried from one fire to the next. This is the third twist. The human mind didn't evolve alone. It evolved together. One mind shared its discovery with another. One generation passed its understanding to the next. Memory became a chain connecting past to future. The brain grew not only in size, but in purpose. And then came something even stranger, the dawn of creativity. No one explained why it happened. No one instructed humanity to create beauty from stone and bone. Yet there, on cave walls across the world, early art began to appear. Hands traced symbols into stone. Pigments formed images of animals, hunts, spirits, and the shapes of dreams. Why did humans create art? Why did they feel the need to mark the world? Science offers theories, spirituality offers others, but the truth remains deeper. Art meant connection to something beyond survival. Something inside the mind reached for meaning, for memory, for beauty, for something more. This was not instinct. This was humanity becoming aware of itself, and with awareness came imagination. Humans began to imagine what could be, not only what was. This is the birth of mythology, of belief, of the first questions about existence. The mind was no longer trapped in the present. It explored past worlds and future possibilities. And so we arrive at the fourth twist. The most powerful tool ever created was not a weapon or a shelter. It was the human mind. A mind capable of dreaming, a mind capable of planning, a mind capable of asking questions that still echo today. As this silent growth continued, humanity began to change. People formed groups, shared stories, passed down knowledge, and shaped the first foundations of culture. The world we know today began in places that left no written record. It began in the mind. Even now, scientists cannot fully explain how the brain transformed. Some believe climate shaped us. Others believe cooperation drove evolution. Still others believe a combination of the two. The truth may be stranger than any explanation. But one thing is certain: the seeds of civilization were planted long before the first city was built. The most important changes happened before history began. Before language took form, before art was carved into stone. The mind grew quietly in hidden centuries we will never recover. As this chapter closes, imagine those early ancestors once more, sitting in silence, watching the world unfold, ideas forming like distant stars. The first sparks of thought taking shape in their minds. The world did not know it was changing, but the mind did. The greatest transformation in our history did not happen in cities or temples. It happened in silence. The story of humanity began not with monuments or writing, but with the quiet awakening of thought itself, an evolution that shaped the destiny of every generation to come. In the world before memory, the greatest discovery was not the wheel or the tool or the fire. It was the mind. Long before the first cities rose from stone, before temples stood against the horizon and kings carved their names into the earth, there was fire. Not just a flame for warmth or cooking, but a center of life itself. Fire became the first gathering place, the first shelter against darkness, the first symbol of safety and home. In the endless uncertainty of prehistoric nights, fire offered something no other force in the natural world could: control. This is where the story of civilization begins, not in monuments but in the flicker of glowing embers. Imagine a world before human dominance. Night belonged to the wilderness. Animals moved in the shadows. The cries of predators echoed through the dark. Lightning split the sky, storms rolled over the landscape, winds carried the voices of the unknown. And somewhere in that darkness, a small group of humans huddled close to a flame. The fire crackles. Sparks rise and vanish into the night. The shadows on the ground twist and shift like silent memories. The warmth surrounds the people gathered there, not just warming their skin, but awakening something deeper. This is the first twist of the chapter. Fire did not just change the world around us, it changed the world within us. With fire came protection. Dangerous animals lingered at the edges of the light, too cautious or afraid to cross into its glow. The night became safer. Sleep became deeper. Families could rest more through the darkest hours. The world grew a little less threatening. But more importantly, fire brought people together. Around the flames, early humans shared food and warmth. They looked into the light and saw each other's faces clearly. They spoke in simple words or gestures. They told stories. They remembered the past. They dreamed of tomorrow. Villages didn't begin with houses. They began with fires. The first communities were nothing more than circles of light pressed against a sea of darkness. They were not bound by walls, but by warmth and belonging. Each fire was the heartbeat of a tribe, a sacred place where knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. And slowly, a new idea formed: safety. Until fire, survival was moment to moment. Every night was a question. Every shadow held danger. But beneath the glow of a flame, humans began to plan. They could think about the next day, the next hunt, the next season. Fire created time, not just the passing of it, but the meaning of it. This is the second twist. Fire allowed humans to imagine a future. It was more than warmth or protection. It allowed memory to grow. The people sitting at the edge of firelight became the first storytellers. The crackling logs became the first stage. The flames became the first teacher, and the stories told there became the foundation of culture. Around the fire, lessons were shared. The young learned how to hunt, how to track the stars, how to read the land. They learned fear and courage. They learned right and wrong. They learned who they were. It was around the fire that the first myths began. Human eyes have always been drawn to light in the darkness, and our ancestors were no different. They saw shapes in the flames and spirits in the embers. They imagined worlds beyond the horizon, gods who controlled the seasons, and shadows that whispered forbidden knowledge. Fire became the boundary between the known and the unknown. Now imagine the scene more closely. Night has settled over a prehistoric valley. The wind moves through grass like a silent river. In the distance, the moon rises, pale and watchful. A small tribe sits together, their faces half lit by firelight. Someone tells a story, someone laughs softly. Someone stares into the flames, lost in thought. This moment may seem simple, but it contains the seeds of civilization. The fire brought people closer. And as groups grew larger and gatherings became more common, something else emerged: leadership. Decisions had to be made. Conflicts had to be resolved. The first quiet ideas of community formed not from power or politics, but from the shared need to survive. No empire could exist without this first lesson. Humans are stronger together than alone. But fire changed more than just society. It changed biology. With warmth came new food. Cooking broke down fibers and nutrients. The human body no longer had to spend as much energy digesting raw food. The brain grew larger. The jaw shrank. The body evolved away from constant survival and toward thought. This is the third twist. Fire literally rewired our bodies and minds. It may be impossible to imagine today, but without fire there would be no language, no cooperation, no planning, no civilization. The ability to cook, stay warm, share tools, and protect each other gave humans the power to thrive in places no other species could. And so, by the light of the fire, the world changed. Villages began as circles of flames beneath the stars. No walls, no houses. Just groups of people who learned to stay. The first settlements appeared not because of fear, but because of belonging. Fire turned wanderers into families. It turned small groups into tribes. It turned isolation into connection. Around those embers, dreams grew. Humans forged tools in the heat, shaped weapons and rituals. They made offerings to the fire as if it were a living spirit. They believed it carried the voice of ancestors, that its smoke was a bridge to unseen realms. Even today, across cultures, fire remains sacred. It reminds us of where we began. As time passed, these simple gatherings formed the foundation of the first communities. The circle of fire became the center of life, and even as villages expanded and shelters evolved into homes and cities, the fire never lost its place. It burned at the heart of temples, towers, and hearths. It warmed the first civilizations, protected the first farmers, and ignited the first dreams of more. Fire created space for humanity to grow. And so we come to the quiet conclusion of this chapter. Before the rise of cities, before the dawn of writing, before the first walls were raised to mark the edge of civilization, there was a single source of light in the darkness: fire. It gave us warmth. It gave us safety. It gave us belonging. But more than anything, fire gave us each other. The age of fire and shadow wasn't a moment in time. It was a transformation. It shaped our bodies, our minds, and our future. It turned night into home. The world before memory became a world of community. A world of survival. A world of shared stories flickering beneath the stars. Fire was the first beginning of civilization, not in stone or metal, but in light. There is a question that lingers at the heart of our origin story, one that even today remains unanswered. How did one species spread across the entire world in such a short slice of time and survive every environment it encountered? In only thousands of years, humans migrated into places no other mammal had ever mastered. We crossed frozen tundra where the winds cut against the skin like knives. We traveled into dense rainforests alive with predators and disease. We walked into vast deserts where the sun scorched the earth into sand and silence. And somehow our bodies changed. We adapted to places that should have been impossible for us. Our bones strengthened. Our skin changed. Our lungs adjusted. Our minds learned the rules of each new environment. Within the great span of human prehistory, we became one of the most adaptable species on Earth. And yet, even now, scientists find themselves asking the same question: how did it happen so fast? The world we moved into was not a forgiving one. At the time, Earth was shaped by harsh climates and constant upheaval. Temperatures shifted. Ice sheets grew and melted. Forests expanded and shrank. Oceans rose and swallowed ancient coastlines. The planet was restless and unpredictable, but humans kept moving forward. Imagine a group traveling across a frozen plain during the height of the Ice Age. Cold surrounds them like an endless wall. The air is thin and sharp. Every breath burns. But these early humans learned to weave furs and hides into clothing. They built shelters from bone and ice. They mastered fire not just as warmth, but as survival itself. They adapted. Then imagine a different world: dense tropical forests thick with heat and humidity. The air is heavy. Shadows rustle with unseen creatures. The ground is alive with plants, insects, and predators hidden beneath the leaves. Yet humans learned the secrets of the forest. They used plants for medicine. They crafted tools from wood and stone. They learned to hunt, forage, and thrive. It wasn't just endurance, it was transformation. This is the first twist of the chapter. Humans did not adapt slowly over millions of years. Many of these changes happened rapidly, faster than traditional evolutionary models once predicted. In just a handful of generations, new environments shaped our bodies and minds. In high mountain valleys, human bodies developed larger lungs and greater blood oxygen. In deserts, skin darkened to guard against the sun. In cold northern climates, metabolisms changed to conserve heat. Each environment demanded something different, and somehow humanity answered. But how? To understand this, we have to look deeper into the nature of adaptation. For most animals, change is slow and inflexible. Their survival depends on biology alone, but humans possess something unique: intelligence. We did not wait for evolution to catch up. We created tools, clothing, shelters, and strategies. The world was a puzzle, and our ancestors learned to solve it. This is the second twist. Adaptation was not just physical, it was cultural. Knowledge spread, allowing humans to survive where biology alone could not. One generation discovered how to hunt in the tundra. Another learned how to gather food in the desert. These lessons passed through families and tribes. They became traditions, rituals, and technologies. Adaptation did not belong only to the body, it belonged to the mind. And yet, even this still does not explain everything. Across the world, groups separated by oceans and continents developed unique features. Skin color varied, height changed, bone structures shifted, faces adapted to wind, sun, cold, and heat. These transformations took thousands of years, but not millions. This is where the mystery deepens. The speed of human adaptation continues to surprise scientists. Genetic evidence reveals changes that happened at rates previously thought impossible. Climate pushed us. Necessity changed us. But something else was at work: cooperation. Humans survived because they shared what they learned. A lone individual could not survive a blizzard. But a group could. A single person could not map the stars or predict the seasons, but a community could. The world became a teacher and humanity became the student. Picture an early settlement near the boundary of ice and land. The wind roars like a living force. The cold settles into every bone. A family sits beside a fire in a winter shelter made of stone and earth. They share the knowledge of ancestors: how to track animals, how to store food, how to use snow and ice to stay alive. These were the schools of prehistory. And while the knowledge was simple, its power was extraordinary. It allowed humans to survive in every corner of the world. It allowed us to learn from one another, to grow, and to improve. But there is one final twist in this story. Humans did not just adapt to the world adapted to us. As we spread, we shaped the environments we encountered. We hunted and gathered. We burned grasslands to create new food sources. We altered rivers and coasts. We followed herds and changed their migration patterns. Even before cities or agriculture, humans were shaping the earth. Adaptation was not a passive process. It was a conversation between humanity and the planet. The world changed us, and we changed the world. Even today, genetic echoes of these transformations remain. The strength of our bones, the color of our skin, the patterns of our thought, the languages we speak, and the stories we tell. They are all marks of the environments our ancestors lived in. Yet the mystery remains: how did a single species learn to survive everywhere? How did we become travelers of ice, desert, and jungle? How did we cross mountains and oceans without maps or machines? The answer is not simple. It lies in thousands of years of movement. It lies in the minds that learned to adapt and the cultures that carried knowledge forward. It lies in the connection between people who shared ideas around ancient fires and in the instinct to keep going even when the world changed. As this chapter closes, imagine humanity once more on the move. A group walks across shifting sands. A blizzard clouds the sky in another world. Rainforests whisper with unseen life, and yet humans march through all of them, carrying their knowledge and their courage with them. This is the story of adaptation, not a miracle, but a testament to endurance, intelligence, and survival. A journey that shaped our bodies and our destiny. The world was vast and unforgiving, But wherever we walked, we learned to stay. And in that simple truth lies the greatest mystery of all. We did not wait for the world to accept us. We became a species that could belong anywhere. There was a time in human history when we shared the world with others like us. Not just one human species, but many. Long before writing, long before civilization, long before memory itself, our world was home to different kinds of humans, each with their own strengths, their own stories, their own fate. And then they vanished. Not in a single moment, not in a great war or a single catastrophe, but slowly, silently, across the span of thousands of years. The world changed, and those ancient relatives disappeared into the quiet of prehistory. They left behind bones and fragments of tools. They left behind traces in our DNA, but they did not leave behind their stories. Those remain buried beneath the earth. This is where one mystery in our journey becomes unavoidable. How did so many human species rise, flourish, and fall during the same age that gave birth to us? Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, others still unnamed. They lived across continents, in landscapes shaped by ice and forest, mountain and sea. They adapted to worlds that tested them in extreme ways. And yet only one human species survived into the modern era. Ours. We often imagine ourselves alone in the ancient world, but we were not. Our ancestors once looked into the eyes of other humans, humans who were not us. They lived in Europe, in Asia, in remote islands across the Pacific. Some stood tall and powerful, their bodies shaped by harsh winters. Others were small, living on islands where resources were scarce. Some lived in caves, some crossed oceans. They were not myths, they were real. And then slowly the world changed, and so did their fate. The first twist in this chapter is simple. We did not replace them instantly. For thousands of years, we shared the planet. We walked the same valleys. We hunted the same animals. We used tools, language, and fire. Some groups may even have traded knowledge. And we know that at times our ancestors interbred with them, leaving fragments of their DNA carried forward in our own. Yet something happened that shifted the balance. Imagine a world 50,000 years ago. The Ice Age held the northern continents in a frozen grip. Forests and plains stretched endlessly across the land. Rivers ran wild and cold. Neanderthal families gathered in caves, building fires against the winter chill. Their tools were precise and strong. They understood the land well. They were skilled hunters and survivors. Their story should have continued. But by 40,000 years ago, they were gone. Not wiped out by war, not wholly defeated by disease, but gradually disappearing from the world. One settlement vanished. Then another. Their numbers dwindled until only their bones remained. And then there were the Denisovans, a species known not from cities or artifacts, but from fragments, one finger bone, a few teeth, traces of DNA deep in the mountains of Siberia. They lived for thousands of years in silence, hidden from the record of history. They left behind no written words, no monuments, only the evidence of their existence within the human genome. These were not primitive beings. They were survivors of a world we can barely imagine. They mastered the mountains and the cold. They lived where survival seemed impossible. But their story, too, came to an end. We do not know how, we do not know why. Some scientists believe climate change weakened them. Others suggest that competition with our species slowly pushed them aside. Still others think small populations simply could not endure the brutal shifts in the ancient world. And yet, none of these explanations feel complete. Because there is a deeper truth. The world was changing faster than any human species could endure alone. As modern humans spread further across the earth, other species began to shrink. Populations grew isolated. resources disappeared, the ancient balance shifted, and in that shift our relatives faded from existence. There is still another mystery. On remote islands, tiny humans called Homo floresiensis lived for thousands of years. Their tools were small and simple, yet they survived the same ages of darkness and change. They shared their world with us, and then they vanished as well. Whenever their histories ended, they left behind one final riddle. We do not know their last words. We do not know their beliefs. We do not know if they dreamed of the future. Their lives ended without record, without story, without memory. Only silence remains. The mystery deepens when we consider this. For nearly the entire history of our species, we were not alone. We walked beside others who thought and learned and adapted. But only one lineage carried the story forward. Ours. Some believe this was fate. Others believe it was chance. Some see it as the result of adaptability, ingenuity, or cooperation. But the truth is impossible to know. We only see the aftermath. It is hard to imagine meeting another human species today. Harder still to imagine knowing that their world was ending. But our ancestors lived in that moment. They watched the world change. They watched the familiar disappear, and they kept moving forward. Even now, these ancient relatives remain part of us, in the structure of our DNA, in the tools we inherited, in the landscapes they shaped. Their legacy did not vanish completely. It echoes in every thought and action we carry into the world. And yet the greatest mystery remains this. Why are we the last? Was it intelligence, cooperation, chance, or something we still do not understand? Scientists continue to search the earth for answers. They descend into caves, sift through ancient soil, read the shadows of fossil bones. Each discovery reveals something new and reveals how much we still do not know. Their stories are buried beneath the earth. Our connection to them remains incomplete. Their voices are lost to time. As this chapter draws to a close, imagine them once more. Neanderthals watching firelight flicker against the cave walls. Denisovans staring at the mountains beneath a pale moon. Other ancient humans living lives no different from ours, filled with challenge, danger, family, hope. Their world ended. Ours continued. But their story is not gone. It lives beneath our skin, in the memory of our genes, in the ancient threads that tie us to a world before memory. The vanished ancestors may be lost to time, but they are not forgotten. They are part of us. And their silent footsteps still echo beneath the soil of our world. Long before the first cities rose from the desert, before the earliest kings walked across palace floors and recorded their power in stone, something remarkable was happening in quiet corners of the ancient world. Human beings were already inventing. They crafted tools, shaped shelters, carved symbols, and created objects that were more than simple things. They were expressions of thought, intention, and imagination. These inventions did not come from civilization. They came long before it. Civilization did not appear suddenly. It grew from minds that had been evolving for tens of thousands of years. Picture a group of early humans working around a fire. The sparks drift upward into the night. Someone chips a piece of stone with careful blows. The sharp edge is shaped by experience and memory. Another person twists rough fibers into cord. A third arranges animal skins into a shelter against the cold. These were not simple acts. They were inventions, small steps toward the world to come. The first twist of this chapter is quiet but profound. The roots of civilization stretch far deeper than the cities we study. We are used to measuring history with monuments. We look to pyramids, temples, and walls as the starting points of human culture. But long before these structures existed, humans were already inventors, artists, and builders. They shaped their world from stone and bone, wood and clay, and their creativity was not an accident. It was a survival strategy. In prehistoric caves, archaeologists find tools that show precision and planning. Blades carved so well that they could not have been created through chance. They reveal that early humans understood materials, how stone fractured, how bone could be polished, how animal hide could be stretched and sewn. These skills were not random discoveries. They were knowledge that spread across generations. Imagine a small group moving across an open landscape. They carry tools in leather pouches, weapons shaped from obsidian and flint. Every object tells a story of careful hands and thoughtful minds. These tools were the beginnings of technology, slow, deliberate, and made from necessity. And soon, something even more surprising appeared: art. We find it in caves across the world. Handprints left in ochre, figures drawn in charcoal, carvings and clay figurines shaped by the first artists. These ancient images are more than decoration. They are evidence of imagination, proof that early humans saw the world in symbols and stories. This is the second twist in our story. Art was not created by civilization. Civilization grew from art. Before writing, before metal, before cities, humans were already marking their existence on the world. They were asking questions and expressing ideas. They were making jewelry from shells and stones. They were shaping the earliest tools for hunting and cooking. They were building shelters to protect their families. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the sound of the ancient world being transformed by human hands. The wind moves across the land like a voice. A hunter lifts a tool crafted from flint. Sparks fly from the edge. A woman presses pigments onto stone. A child listens to the stories of the elders. Each invention, each idea becomes the foundation of everything we would later call civilization. And yet none of it was written down. No tablets preserve the names of these early inventors. No monuments carry their faces. Their memories are hidden in fragments of bone and stone. Their brilliance survives only in the objects they left behind. But the presence of invention tells us something powerful. The journey toward civilization was older and quieter than we ever imagined. And then came shelters, places where humans stayed longer than a night or a season. Not yet villages, not yet cities, but the beginning of permanence. The idea took shape slowly. A structure here, a gathering place there. A circle of stones arranged around a hearth. These were the first communities, born from the desire for safety and belonging. The early inventors did not simply survive the world, they shaped it. They found ways to tame the wilderness, to hunt with precision, to craft tools that made their lives more predictable. Their creativity allowed them to live in worlds where instinct alone was not enough. It is easy to look back on this age and imagine life as primitive. But the truth is far more complex. These humans understood their environment. They knew how to read the weather and the stars. They knew which plants healed and which harmed. They knew how to follow the seasons and how to care for one another. Knowledge became the greatest invention of all. This leads to the third twist of the chapter. Innovation was not an event, it was a shared legacy. One generation discovered a new tool, the next improved it. The knowledge spread across tribes and lands. It passed through stories and observation. In this way, invention became tradition, a tradition that would one day lead to the first cities. Consider this scene. A group gathers at the edge of a forest. They carry stone blades, woven baskets, and animal hide clothing. They have mastered the world enough to stay. The shelter they build is simple, but it holds warmth and protection. A new idea takes shape, born from necessity and ingenuity. We do not know their names, but their influence remains. The inventions of this forgotten age were foundations. Without them, cities could not have risen. Without them, writing could not have taken shape. Without them, art and myth and culture could not have become what they are today. And yet all of it happened without record, without writing, without monuments. These innovators lived the earliest chapters of civilization, but history did not record their achievements. Their stories exist in the silence of time. As this chapter ends, imagine those hidden inventors standing at the edge of history. They do not know that their tools will lead to architecture. They do not know that their art will echo for thousands of years. They do not know that their shelters will become cities. But they create anyway, because the story of human invention is not about power or empire. It is about creativity born from survival, imagination born from need, and knowledge passed through generations. Civilization did not begin with walls or kings. It began with the human mind. Long before history was written, the world was shaped by hands that believed in a future no one had yet imagined. Their inventions were quiet. Their stories were silent, but their legacy remains in everything we build today. They were the world's first creators. The hidden inventors of a civilization still waiting to be born. There was an age when ice ruled the world, a time when the earth was colder than anything we can imagine today. The wind carried frost across entire continents. The sea level fell as oceans became glaciers. Mountain ranges rose among frozen plains, and valleys were carved from solid ice. This was the world our ancestors walked into. We call it the Ice Age, a chapter in human history written not in words, but in the landscape itself. The glaciers shaped everything. They altered climates, redirected rivers, and reshaped the face of the earth. They turned whole regions into frozen deserts and forced life into narrow paths of survival. And yet, through this darkness and cold, humans endured. Imagine a world covered in ice. The ground crackles beneath each step. The air freezes in the lungs. The sky is low and heavy. Across this frozen wilderness, small groups of humans migrate beneath a gray sun. They carry only what they can hold: stone tools, furs, fire. There are no cities, no kingdoms, no safety. Just the sound of the wind and the long struggle to stay alive. This is the first twist of the chapter. The Ice Age was not just a climate. It was a force that shaped the destiny of our species. Life narrowed into zones where survival was barely possible. Humans sought shelter in caves and valleys. They followed herds of animals, mammoths, reindeer, bison, across endless routes. They hunted not just with strength, but with planning and cooperation. The world demanded it. Every part of existence during this age was changed by ice. Plants grew low to the ground. Water froze and thawed with the seasons. The land held only small windows of opportunity, and humans learned to read its signals. They understood the movement of animals. They learned to store food during scarce winters. They built new kinds of shelters and clothing to endure the cold. Their world was harsh, but it also created resilience. The ice did not only destroy, it created. Glaciers carved valleys that later became fertile. They exposed stones, minerals, and flint that became tools. They shaped coastlines where people would one day settle. The face of the earth was rewritten. And humans rewrote themselves. Skin adapted to block the sun or conserve heat. Bodies grew stronger or leaner depending on the land. Diets changed. Behaviors shifted. Even brain development followed new paths as humans learned to plan for long winters and unpredictable climates. This is the second twist. The Ice Age did not weaken humanity. It made humanity. To survive, humans developed cooperation on a scale no other species had achieved. Families became tribes. Tribes became small communities. Responsibility was shared. The old dangers demanded new solutions. And in those solutions, we see the early traces of the world to come. Fire became a lifeline. Clothing and tools grew more sophisticated. The first layered shelters appeared. Food preservation and cooking became essential. And slowly a pattern formed. Necessity gave rise to invention. Yet even today, there is a mystery. Not every question has been answered. Some aspects of how humans adapted to extreme cold and shifting climates remain debated. Patterns of migration, timing, and genetic adaptation are still studied. The Ice Age left clues but not complete explanations. Fossils, tools, and DNA each reveal part of a story that scientists are still piecing together. Not everything is known. Not everything is understood. And that is where the third twist emerges. Human resilience outpaced our ability to record it. Imagine again a scene during this age. A blizzard sweeps across a frozen plain. A group of humans shelters inside a cave, firelight reflecting against the icy walls. The flames flicker like ancient memories. Outside, the wind roars like a living creature. Inside, people sleep close together. They survived because they adapted, physically, culturally, and mentally. They did more than endure the cold. They learned from it. The glaciers acted like gates, opening and closing paths across continents. As the ice advanced and retreated, humans moved with it. New lands appeared as sea levels dropped. Coastlines stretched far from their modern positions. Entire continents were connected by frozen ground. People crossed them. And as they did, they changed not only themselves, but the history of the world. Migrations during the Ice Age would shape the paths of future civilizations. They would determine where humans settled, which ideas were shared, and how cultures evolved. The Ice Age was not just a time of hardship. It was a time of transformation. The cold forced innovation. It demanded cooperation. It shaped the foundations of society and culture. It drew early humans together and pushed them into new worlds. And eventually, slowly, the ice began to melt. The glaciers retreated. Rivers surged across newly thawed land. Forests returned. Animals spread into new habitats. The world opened up once more and humanity moved forward into it. But the memory of the ice remained. It lived on in the stories of ancestors, in the tools they passed down, in the genes still carried by their descendants. It lived on in the resilience of a species that adapted to every environment it encountered. It lived on in the idea that humans could face a world shaped by thunder and cold and survive. As the chapter closes, imagine the last days of the great ice. The sun rises higher. The snow melts. Water rushes across the earth. For the first time in thousands of years, warmth touches the ground. Small groups of humans watch the changing world. They do not know what comes next. They do not know that new lands will become new civilizations. But they understand something deeper. They endured what the world demanded. The Ice Age was not a barrier. It was a beginning, a test of survival, a force that shaped the human journey. The glaciers reshaped the earth, but in return, humanity reshaped itself. The age of ice and thunder ended long ago, yet its echoes remain in everything we have become. There was a moment in human prehistory when the world grew quiet, not because civilization fell or because a great disaster shook the earth, but because entire populations simply disappeared. Group after group faded from the story of humanity until only fragments remained, small traces, bones scattered through caves, tools buried beneath ancient soil, the faintest echoes of lives no one remembered. It became one of the deepest puzzles in archaeology, Why did so many humans vanish? To understand this mystery, we have to return to the late Pleistocene, when the Earth stood on the edge of change. The world's climate shifted with ruthless speed. Ice retreated, seas rose, forests turned into plains and plains into deserts. Food sources changed, animals migrated or died out. People were forced to move or stay and starve. But there was something more, something no one fully understands. This was not just one extinction. It happened across continents, across thousands of years, touching groups that had survived for millennia. Entire communities vanished. Some were isolated hunters in the Arctic. Others were early coastal travelers. Others lived deep in forests or valleys where the earth soon swallowed their homes. Some left behind tools so refined that their inventors must have possessed knowledge we still struggle to imagine. Then, silence. The first twist of this chapter is not that humans died, it is that their stories ended without explanation. Archaeologists find sudden breaks in the fossil record. A settlement is abandoned. A cave no longer occupied. A tool tradition stops. These are not gradual endings. They feel abrupt, as if life in those places simply faded overnight. Imagine a group of early humans living in a sheltered valley. They have survived for generations. They know the land well. They read the seasons, track animals, and tend fire. Their children grow up beneath the open sky. Then one year something changes. The animals move further north. The water runs low. The winds shift, winter stretches longer, food disappears, illness spreads. The valley that once felt safe becomes a place of struggle, and then without anyone to record it, the community ends. Not with destruction, not with war, simply with absence. There are theories, many of them. Some say climate was the cause, some speak of disease. Some believe competition among groups slowly reduced their numbers. Others imagine that small populations simply could not withstand the pressures of a world in flux. But none of these answers feel complete. The puzzle remains unsolved. This is the second twist. The Great Die-Off was not a single event, but a pattern. It happened in waves, in different places, at different times. Humans disappeared in Australia, in Europe, in Asia, in the Americas, sometimes long before other groups arrived, sometimes after. The Earth itself was changing. The end of the Ice Age reshaped coastlines and forests. Floods erased whole regions. Glaciers created barriers and opened new lands. In those years, survival depended on adaptation, cooperation, and knowledge. Yet even the most skilled groups were not spared. We know this not from written accounts, but from fragments. A bone in a cave, a single tool beneath the earth, a sudden break in a line of ancestry. The silence of archaeology reveals that many ancestors did not survive the greatest transition of the ancient world. Some people moved on. Others were trapped by geography and climate. Some merged with other populations. Some were lost forever. We still do not know how many lives were erased or how many cultures vanished without leaving a trace. But the world carries hints. Genes that passed from one group to another, tools found near the bones of strangers. The shapes of traditions that echo across continents. Small details that survived when everything else fell away. It was not only humans who disappeared. Large animals were lost as well, mammoths, giant cats, ancient bison, mysterious species that never see the modern world. Their extinction patterns mirror our own, suggesting that the world itself was caught in a storm of change. The climate shifted. The world transformed. Populations fell. And yet some survived. This leads to the third twist. Human resilience was uneven. Some groups endured while others perished. Why? We do not know. Some say cooperation saved them. Others say technology made the difference. Others believe simple chance decided the fate of entire lineages. Perhaps a river dried just one season too soon. Perhaps a herd of animals moved beyond reach. Perhaps a harsh winter arrived before the tribe was ready. Small changes could mean survival or the end. Picture the Earth during this time. The glaciers shrink, the seas swell. Islands vanish beneath rising water, coastlines retreat inland, the world redraws itself. A single settlement could be wiped away as the sea consumes the land. A tribe that once hunted mammoth can no longer find prey. Another group falls to sickness in the cold. For every reason we understand, there are many more we do not. Even today, archaeologists uncover sites where whole communities vanished. The soil is rich with remains. The tools are still sharp. The shelters still hold their shape, but the people are gone. It feels as though something closed a chapter on them and moved on. But their disappearance shaped the world we now live in. The survivors carried forward the story. They inherited the earth that others left behind. They formed the foundation of future populations. The great die-off was not just an ending, it was a turning point. The humans who remained gained a world that was newly open, newly transformed. With the changing climates came new possibilities. The land became fertile. New animals emerged. Rivers created rich valleys. Forests grew where ice once stood. And humanity stepped into a new dawn, yet the questions remain. Why did some groups vanish while others endured? Why do their tools remain but not their stories? Why do we inherit their world but not their memories? The truth is buried deep in the earth. As the chapter closes, imagine the silence that followed those disappearances. The fire pits long cold, the shelters abandoned, the footprints washed away by wind and rain. There were no monuments to mark their passing, no storytellers to remember them. Only the land itself holds their memory. The great die-off remains one of the deepest mysteries in archaeology, not because we know nothing, but because every answer opens new questions. Populations vanished, cultures faded, lives ended without record, but the earth remembers, and we remember through the faint traces they left behind. Their silence became part of our story, their absence shaped our future. The world changed and humanity changed with it. Some footsteps ended, others continued. And from those surviving lines, the next chapter of history began. Long before the first cities rose into stone and sunlight, before kingdoms organized the world behind walls and banners, there were other societies, older, quieter, and almost entirely forgotten. They did not leave monuments to their power. They did not carve their names into rock. Yet they built civilizations of another kind, communities bound by belief, by trade, by shared ideas. What if civilization did not begin with cities at all? What if the foundations were laid in ages we barely remember? Archaeology reveals fragments that challenge the old timeline. Shells carried far inland, stones from distant mountains, pigments from lands miles away. These objects were traded across groups that never built a marketplace, that never engraved a written record. Yet they exchanged knowledge, goods, and meaning. These were civilizations without streets or rulers, civilizations of culture, not stone. Imagine a world without borders. Forests stretch across the horizon. Rivers weave through the land like ancient pathways. Small communities live along these waters, hunting, gathering, sharing stories by the fire. They meet travelers from faraway places. They exchange tools, ideas, and traditions. This is the first twist of the chapter. People were connected long before cities existed. For generations, scholars believed civilization began suddenly with agriculture and writing. But evidence shows something older, something more subtle. The roots of complex society were present in the minds of early humans. Cooperation began long before hierarchy. Ritual began long before temples. Community began long before the first city wall. Trade was the earliest form of connection. Across deserts, mountains, and coastlines, artifacts reveal roots older than recorded history. A stone found hundreds of miles from where it was shaped. A shell bracelet in a cave far from the sea. Finely crafted beads buried with those who never lived near their origin. These details point to communication and exchange. Even without writing, people found ways to understand one another. They shared symbols and gestures, they carried knowledge over vast distances, and they passed stories from group to group. This world was not isolated. It was woven together. The second twist is hidden in the objects themselves. Many of these ancient artifacts carry meaning that goes beyond function. A piece of ochre carved with parallel lines, a pendant shaped from bone, patterns painted on cave walls. These were not random marks. They were symbols, signs of thought and belief. They represented identity, memory, or ritual. They connected people to each other and to something greater than themselves. Civilization begins with symbols, not with buildings or kings. Meaning came first. Picture a group gathered around a fire at night. A storyteller speaks in a language we no longer understand. The flames flicker across painted stones and carved figures. A ritual unfolds, simple perhaps, but powerful. Something is being passed down through generations. Memory, teaching, identity. These early societies had no cities to bind them. They did not need them. Their world was shaped by shared belief, shared survival, and shared thought. Some groups settled for seasons near rivers and lakes, building shelters of stone and wood that lasted far longer than a single generation. These were not nomads with no roots. They were people who returned to the same sacred places again and again. Archaeologists find hearths that burned for centuries. Tools that were carefully repaired and passed down. Burial sites that show respect, memory, and grief. Even without writing, these are signs of culture. And perhaps the greatest sign of all is ritual. In caves across Europe, Asia, and Africa, early humans left evidence of ceremonies. Red ochre on bones. Careful burials, patterns of artifacts placed beside the dead. These practices did not arise from necessity, they arose from belief. People imagined life beyond life. They imagined spirits and ancestors. They imagined worlds unseen. This is the third twist. Spirituality is older than civilization. Religion did not emerge from cities. It existed in human hearts long before temples were built. The earliest people looked to the sky and wondered at the stars. They listened to storms and believed in forces they could not see. These ideas were shared across continents. Yet these societies did not leave behind walls or monuments. They left behind something quieter, something more enduring, the beginnings of community. And still, the greatest mystery remains. Why did these early societies not become cities? Why did they not grow into empires? Some groups stayed small, content with what the world provided. Their lives were shaped by nature, by the rhythms of seasons, by the movement of animals and water. Their societies were flexible, not rigid. Their leadership was communal, not centralized. They did not build cities because they did not need them, but their contributions were not lost. They laid the foundations for the world that came after. The knowledge they carried, how to hunt, how to gather, how to survive, became the blueprint for future civilizations. They were builders of ideas. Think of a time when people gather beneath ancient trees. They share food and tools. They sing, dance, and celebrate. They carve symbols into stone. These moments are not recorded in history books, They are not mapped onto timelines, but they shaped the patterns of humanity. Civilization did not begin with architecture. It began with connection. As this chapter draws to a close, imagine those forgotten societies once more. They stand at the edge of history, not yet building cities or writing laws, but they are already shaping the human story. Their art, their tools, their rituals, and their communities formed the first threads of culture. They created networks of knowledge and belief that bind us even now. We call them prehistoric, but that word does not capture their complexity. They were societies with memory, imagination, and identity. They did not leave behind towering monuments, but they left behind the world we inherited. These were the lost civilizations of tomorrow, not measured in stone or walls, but in the invisible connections between people. They remind us that civilization is more than cities. It is the sum of our ideas, our shared lives, and our belief in one another. They lived without writing, but their story continues. They built without cities, but their foundations remain. Their society was not lost. It became the world we know today. There was a moment in human history when something changed. We do not know the exact year, place, or even generation. There is no record of the first idea that went beyond mere survival. No witness carved the moment into stone. But somewhere in the ancient world, the human mind crossed an invisible threshold. We began to imagine. It did not happen suddenly, not like a lightning strike or a single epiphany. But slowly, over countless lifetimes, a different kind of thought emerged. A thought that could leave the present moment and explore the past and future. A thought that could stretch into dreams and possibilities. This was the spark that separated us from all other life. Before this change, humans survived much like other animals. We hunted, gathered, and lived in rhythm with the world. But then our minds began to reshape everything around us. We no longer reacted to the world, we shaped it through thought. This is the first twist of the chapter. The spark of intelligence was not just knowledge, it was imagination. Picture an ancient night thousands of years ago. A small community sits around a fire. The stars are clear above them, bright and endless. Someone looks at the constellation and wonders what lies beyond its light. Another studies the fire and imagines using it for more than warmth. A third sees the bones of a hunted animal and envisions a tool that had never been carved before. These were not instincts. They were ideas. The human mind learned to create before it learned to understand what creation meant. With this spark came memory. We remembered our stories, our victories, and our mistakes. We passed them on to others, building a chain of knowledge longer than any lifespan. A new kind of inheritance began, not of blood alone, but of thought. And soon, imagination became invention. Tools grew sharper, shelters grew stronger. Art found form on cave walls and stones. People did more than solve immediate problems. They planned. They built for tomorrow. They prepared for seasons and storms not yet here. The world slowly changed. What separates our ancestors from every other species is not only what we created, but why we created it. We made tools not just for today, but for the future. We hunted not just for food, but for strategy. We slept not just for rest, but for dreams. And then something else emerged, symbolic thought. Symbols, language, story, myth, these were the true revolutions, the ability to let one thing represent another. A word could describe a memory. A picture could represent an idea. A gesture could carry meaning. With symbols came communication. With communication came shared knowledge. With shared knowledge came power. This is the second twist. Human intelligence did not grow in isolation. It grew through connection. We learned together. We imagined together. We built realities from collective thought. A single idea could spread from one mind to another and become something greater. A stone tool design could inspire a better one. A ritual could evolve into a belief. A story could teach a generation how to survive. The spark of intelligence became the spark of culture. And as the mind expanded, something deeper happened. Humans looked beyond the horizon. They wondered about what could not be seen. They asked questions no other animal had ever asked. Where did we come from? What lies beyond death? What exists beyond the stars? These questions shaped us. They gave birth to religion, art, philosophy, and exploration. They made life more than survival. They made it meaning. Imagine again the ancient world. A small group of humans walks under the glow of the moon. They speak in a language that no longer exists. One describes a hunt that hasn't yet happened. Another predicts the change of weather. A third shares a story that began long before they were born. The future becomes a place where the mind can travel. And then the most extraordinary transformation occurred. The human mind began to change the mind itself. Intelligence became cumulative. Each generation built upon the knowledge of the one before. No other species had ever done this. Chimpanzees, elephants, dolphins, many are intelligent, but their knowledge resets every lifetime. Humans broke that pattern. We learned from one another. This is the third twist. The true leap was not just intelligence, it was shared intelligence. Memory became inherited through teaching. Skills were not lost, they gathered, they grew. A new kind of evolution appeared, not bound to genes or biology, but to ideas. We became beings of imagination. We created stories to explain the world and stories to shape it. We envisioned the hunt before it began. We imagined the shelter before it was built. We dreamed of a world that did not yet exist, and eventually the idea of progress was born. We did not just adapt to the world, we adapted the world to us. The spark that lit the human mind continues to burn today. Every discovery, every invention, every dream is a reflection of the same moment long ago when a simple thought rose above survival and became something more. But the greatest mystery remains. Why did this spark happen only in humans? Other species have intelligence. Other animals communicate and solve problems. But none crossed into the world of abstract thought, symbolic language, and imagination. None built a bridge between memory and possibility. No one fully knows why. Some believe it was language, others say it was cooperation. Some believe social connection demanded intelligence. Still others point to culture. But even with science, genetics, and archaeology, the moment itself remains hidden in the fog of prehistory. It did not happen in a city. It did not happen in a temple. It happened deep in time, in the silence of a world without written history. As this chapter closes, imagine the first dreamer. The first mind to wonder about a world that did not yet exist. The first to see fire and imagine warmth and protection. The first to picture another land, another life. The spark of super-intelligence was not loud. It was a whisper. It changed everything, not through force but through thought. We became more than survivors. We became thinkers, dreamers, and creators. And from that spark, every chapter of our story began. The story of exploration, of knowledge, of civilization. The story of humanity itself. The mind was our first frontier, and we crossed it without even knowing. There was an age in human history when the world began to speak in symbols. Before writing, before temples, before kingdoms and cities, humans painted the walls of caves and carved stories into stone. They sang songs older than memory. They imagined spirits, ancestors, and gods who watched from the darkness. This was the forgotten age of art and myth. It was an era when the human heart began to express something deeper than survival. The world was changing, and so were the minds that lived within it. People looked at the mountains and saw more than rock. They looked at the sky and saw more than stars. They felt that the world was alive with meaning. This is the first twist of our chapter. Art did not begin for beauty. It began for belief. Picture a cave deep in the earth. The walls are cold and rough. The air hangs silent. A small group of early humans enters carrying torches. The flames flicker against the stone. Shadows move across the surface like spirits coming to life. Then someone begins to paint shapes of animals, of hands, of patterns that repeat through centuries. These images are not random. They are messages. They represent the world outside, the world within, and the world beyond. The painter is not simply recording what they see. They are sharing what they feel. Cave art was a bridge between the seen and unseen, and it was only the beginning. Across continents, humans carved figures from bone and stone. They shaped animals, spirits, and forms that meant something sacred. They adorned their bodies with pigments and beads. They buried their dead with objects that had value beyond life. These acts were not necessary for survival. They were necessary for meaning. To create art is to say, we are here, we remember, we believe. The second twist is hidden in the stories behind the images. Myths emerged long before writing. Long before the first languages were carved into clay, humans were telling stories around the fire. Myths about creation, death, ancestors, and gods. Myths that shaped how they saw the world. Myths that gave comfort, fear, connection, and identity. We know this from the evidence they left behind, paintings of hunts that may have been rituals, carvings of figures that may have been spirits or gods, burial sites that show symbols of belief. These ancient people believed that life did not end with death. They believed in forces greater than themselves. They believed that the world was filled with meaning and mystery. And so the first religions were born, not in temples, but in the imagination. Imagine the scene again. Night falls. A tribe gathers around a fire. Someone speaks softly, telling a story of how the world began. The wind rustles through the trees like an unseen presence. The flames dance like spirits in the dark. The story continues until sleep claims the listeners. The myth becomes a thread between generations. These myths were not simple stories. They taught lessons. They offered hope. They explained nature and fate. They told people who they were and where they came from. They guided the rituals that brought the community together. Art and myth became the first teachers. And they spread across the ancient world. We find similar symbols in distant places. Spirals, animals, handprints, circles. These shapes appear in caves from Africa to Europe to Asia and beyond. They speak of a shared consciousness, a shared longing to express the invisible world. The third twist of the chapter is subtle. These ancient beliefs still echo in our modern world. Even today, we paint, we carve, we sing, we tell stories. We create rituals for birth and death. We gather in community around shared symbols. We search for meaning in mystery. We invent myths for the things we cannot explain. The seeds were planted in the forgotten age of art, and some of those seeds grew into the world we inherited. The first symbols were simple marks. Then they became patterns. Then they became traditions. These symbols shaped the earliest cultures. They were taught to children. They were passed from generation to generation. Eventually, they became writing. Art and myth did not fade. They evolved. Picture an ancient burial site. The body is covered in red ochre, a pigment used for thousands of years. Tools are placed beside the dead. Jewelry lies near the bones. These objects are messages across time. They say something about belief, about connection, about the world that lies beyond life. Ritual became one of the defining traits of humanity. The ancient world was filled with ceremony. The first dances, the first songs, the first celebrations of seasons and stars. The world was not just a place to live, it was a place to honor. And through these acts, humans formed the idea of the sacred, not as a doctrine or a religion, but as a feeling. A feeling that there was something greater than the individual, something that connected all life, something that watched over us in silence. As we move toward the close of this chapter, think of the earliest storytellers. They did not write. They did not carve their names into history. But they shaped the beliefs that would one day become the foundations of civilization. A whisper became a story became a myth became a tradition became a culture. The forgotten age of art and myth still speaks in our languages and rituals. It lives in the symbols we wear, the stories we tell, the way we see the world. It is a reminder that humanity did not begin with knowledge, but with imagination. As the fire burns low and the night grows quiet, we return to the cave. The paintings glow faintly in the darkness. The figures on the walls watch over us like guardians of memory. They remind us of who we once were and of who we still are. The ancient world is gone, but the myths remain. The artists are forgotten, but their symbols endure. The rituals are silent, but their echo continues. We live in a world shaped by those first stories, those first symbols, those first dreams. The forgotten age of art and myth was not lost. It lives in every belief, every vision, every idea. It lives in us. There was a night when the world stood on the edge of change. The last ice age was ending. The cold that had ruled the earth for tens of thousands of years began to loosen its grip. The glaciers that once stretched like frozen walls across continents slowly retreated. Rivers thawed, forests returned, and the wind carried a new message across the land. The world was reshaping itself. This was the last frozen night, a moment when old landscapes faded into memory and a new world emerged from beneath the ice. Long before cities existed, long before kings and empires, humanity watched the planet transform. Not through maps or knowledge of climate, not through science. They felt the change through their bodies, through instinct, through the shifting patterns of the world. The first twist of this chapter is simple and powerful. The earth changed, and we changed with it. Imagine a valley blanketed in snow. A small group of humans shelters near a fire. They have survived winters so fierce that the cold could kill in a night. They know how to read the tension in the air, the signs of a storm, the migrations of animals. But this winter is different. The ice begins to melt. Water carves new paths through the land. Rivers flood into plains. Forests stretch into places where once there was only snow. The world is awakening. The people who witness this do not understand the meaning. They have no words to describe climate or warming. They have no memory of a world without ice. Yet their instincts tell them the truth. The world is changing. As the temperatures rise, new lands open. Glaciers retreat like living giants stepping back into the mountains. Coasts shift as the oceans rise. Entire regions become fertile again. Grasslands appear where once there was only stone. Animals migrate along new paths, and humans follow. We tend to imagine ancient migration as a single journey, a one-way path from one continent to another. But the truth is more complex. Human movement was fluid, continuous, unpredictable. As the world reshaped itself, so did the routes our ancestors walked. This is the second twist. The end of the Ice Age was not the end of migration. It was the beginning of the greatest migrations in human history. Groups that had been separated for generations moved into new territories. Some crossed rivers and mountains. Others followed the coastlines. Others traveled inland into lands newly freed from the frozen barrier. The world was reorganizing itself, and humanity expanded with it. Picture the moment when the first groups reached a valley that had been buried beneath ice for thousands of years. The air is warmer. The rivers flow like veins across the land. The soil is rich. Plants grow in abundance. For the first time in generations, there is enough food, enough water, enough safety for families to stay. And so they do. They build shelters, they hunt and gather, they form new communities. The landscape that once seemed hostile becomes a home, but the transformation did not touch every corner of the world at once. Some places thawed quickly. Others remained locked in winter for centuries. The change unfolded like a wave across continents. Some people were trapped by the ice. Others escaped it, and the choices they made would shape the map of humanity forever. The melting of the ice brought new challenges and new opportunities. Rivers flooded, coastlines moved, animals traveled farther than before. The world demanded innovation. Humans developed new tools, new strategies, new ways of living. They learned to fish in deeper waters, to build boats, to cross coastal passages. Survival was no longer enough. Growth became possible, and with growth came connection. Groups that had once lived in isolation encountered each other again. They traded tools and stories. They shared skills and knowledge. Ideas traveled along ancient paths, and slowly a new world culture began to take shape. Not one civilization, but many. The earth had changed, and now humanity began to change in return. It may be hard for us to imagine a world where everything is shifting, not just the climate, but the very shape of the land. But this is what our ancestors saw. They witnessed mountains exposed from ice. They saw valleys filled with forests. They watched the ocean return to the shore, and through it all they survived. The last frozen night was not a moment of destruction. It was a moment of transition. But there was something else, something deeper. As the ice melted, stories began to form. Not only stories of survival, but stories of memory. Stories of where people had come from and where they were going. These stories became the seeds of future cultures. The silent era drew to a close, yet even now it remains unrecorded. No writing tells what they felt when the ice receded. No monument preserves the moment the world changed. All we have are the traces they left behind, tools, shelters, bones, and the earth itself. But those traces whisper of a world on the edge of dawn. The last frozen night faded into morning. The sun rose higher. The world warmed. The land became rich and full of life. Migrations continued across continents and seas. Humanity stepped into new worlds, new possibilities, new futures. The end of the Ice Age was the beginning of history. As this chapter closes, imagine the final night of that ancient world. The fire burns low. The tribe sleeps beneath a changing sky. Snow melts in the distance. The rivers swell. The air is filled with the smell of earth returning to life. No one writes this moment down. No one knows what is coming, but they feel it. They see it. They move toward it. The silent era ends not with a sound, but with a transformation. The world that emerges from ice is the world that will one day give rise to civilization. The world where humanity begins to build, to believe, to remember. The last frozen night passed into history, but like the ice, it never truly disappeared. It remains beneath the world we know, a reminder that even the coldest of ages will one day give way to dawn. There came a moment when the silence of the ancient world ended. For tens of thousands of years, humanity lived without books or records. Knowledge was carried in memory, in ritual, in art and story. Then something changed. Words were carved into clay, symbols were chiseled into stone. Lines were drawn that preserved meaning across generations. Humanity began to write. This was not a single discovery, not one invention that swept across the world. It happened slowly in faraway places, in the valleys of Mesopotamia, along the banks of the Nile, in the lands of the Indus and the ancient cities of China. Each region found its own way to capture language, but the result was the same. The past was finally told in its own voice. This is the first twist of the chapter. Writing did not create civilization. Writing revealed what civilization had already become. Before writing, stories lived only in memory. Families preserved knowledge through the spoken word. Elders passed down tradition. Teachers shared wisdom. But once writing appeared, memory gained a new form. It became permanent. It could travel across distance and time. With writing came record. With record came history. Imagine the first scribe pressing a reed into soft clay. The symbols take shape, simple at first. Numbers, names, the record of food and trade. But slowly those symbols become stories. They become prayers, laws, myths, and dreams. Human hands gave voice to the centuries. And as writing spread, civilizations rose. Cities took shape along rivers and seas. People gathered in numbers never seen before. The first kingdoms emerged. Palaces, temples, and monuments began to appear, structures meant not just for living, but for legacy. Stone replaced memory. Architecture replaced ritual. The world grew taller, louder, and more complex. This is the second twist. Civilization did not begin with conquest. It began with permanence. Agriculture allowed communities to stay in one place. Trade networks formed. Mathematics and measurement took root. Governance became necessary. Laws were written to solve disputes and guide society. Knowledge became something greater than survival. It became identity. The world of writing and stone reshaped humanity. Picture a city along the Euphrates or the Nile. Ships travel the river. Markets fill with trade. Artisans carve statues from rock. Priests mark calendars by the stars. Children learn symbols drawn on clay tablets. A new world has begun, one that looks familiar to us in a way that the ancient eras never could. Yet as history took form, something remarkable happened. The world before writing faded into silence. The first written records speak of kings and gods, of rulers and battles, of laws and inventions. But they tell almost nothing of the people who lived before. Their stories remain buried beneath the earth, in fragments of bone and stone. The 60,000 years before writing remain the greatest untold chapter of our past. Those years contain the birth of intelligence, migration, adaptation, society, art, and belief. They hold mysteries we still haven't unraveled. They shaped who we are just as deeply as the civilizations that followed. But they did not survive in written words. When humans began to write, they wrote about what mattered to their world: power, trade, leadership, spirituality. They built monuments to honor rulers and gods. They left behind records of harvests, cities, and wars. They built structures meant to last forever. But the world of prehistory left no such record. It was preserved in different ways, in tools crafted from stone, in bones buried deep beneath the soil, in caves painted with symbols we still study, in the DNA carried through generations. We do not remember the forgotten age of prehistory through writing. We remember it through the earth. And yet writing did something that changed humanity forever. It allowed ideas to endure. Words could survive the death of their creator. Laws could last longer than a ruler. Knowledge could be shared across centuries. The voices of the past could speak to the future. Writing connected one age to another. This is the third twist. History is not the story of what happened. It is the story we were finally able to preserve. The world became something new. Empires rose and fell, scripts evolved, alphabets replaced symbols, books replaced clay tablets. The spoken word remained, but the written word became the foundation of memory. And yet we never left the ancient world completely behind. Even in the earliest writing, we see echoes of the myths that were once told around the fire. We see symbols that resemble cave paintings. We see rituals and beliefs that stretch back into the unwritten past. The roots of writing are tangled with the roots of memory, imagination, and myth. The dawn of recorded history was not a beginning, but a continuation. It was the moment when humanity learned to hold onto the past. As this chapter draws to a close, imagine the world at the threshold of history. People carve symbols into stone. Temples rise above the desert. Ships cross ancient seas. Cities glow with fire and light. The world breathes with voices and stories, but beneath it all, the silent world remains. The world of the wanderers, the world of the inventors, the world of the artists and dreamers, the world that wrote nothing down. The dawn of history cast light on one age and left another in shadow. The final thought of this story is simple. Writing gave us memory. Civilization gave us permanence. But the greatest mysteries lie in the ages before those things existed. The 60,000 years before writing remain untouched by record, yet they shaped the destiny of our species. They hold the first steps, first thoughts, first dreams. The dawn of recorded history was not the beginning of the human story. It was only the moment when we finally learned to tell it. And the chapters that came before still wait in silence, written not in words, but in the world itself.